begin our work session. We got a kind of a full night here with the board meeting after the work session, so welcome everyone. And I will have Dr. Staloch introduce our purpose and agenda.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Our purpose for having study sessions is so that we can share information, we can continue to build trust as a team that works very closely together, and we can make sure that information is shared in a way that allows for efficient decision making at the board table. Three agenda items for tonight for the study session. We'll start out with a review, kind of a mid-year progress check on some of our district goals. We'll spend most of our time really reviewing where are we with some of our interim student achievement goals, and then I'd also provided information just about some of our district priority work. We'll also get a chance to take a look at where we are kind of in the interim stage of the district scorecard as well. And from then we'll get a budget review and update. You took some action in November, which allowed us to set some parameters around the open enrollment numbers. Tonight we'll talk a little bit about what's been updated since then, including some different budget assumptions, which ultimately at the end of this we'll be giving you a recommendation. We'll be needing to make some budget adjustments and some reductions. So we'll be sharing information with you in terms of that amount, as well as kind of the process over the next couple of months that we'll use. And then as a follow-up from the board development session, where you kind of laid some groundwork around board policies, the board will start working on the 200 series board policy reviews.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
The next item on our agenda is the district governance and policy. That's our board agenda monthly review. As Dr. Staloch referred to, we'll continue to review the school board governance policies, mid-year progress on district goals, the scorecard, and district budget planning and update and planning. And we'll be hearing from them tonight, and that is pretty much right on target for where we should be at according to our agenda. So move on to oversight of operations with district scorecard and interim student data.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and get started. And Krislin's going to be sharing some information with us as well. I'm sure Jeff will be in and out as we talk about some of the teaching and learning things and perhaps other team members. But really tonight what we wanted to do is to just recap kind of where we are. You've seen some of the reviews of some of our priority work, but it's a chance tonight to spend a little time looking at some data, getting you some updates on some changes that we made after some fall data came in, so you can kind of see where we're at and where some of our projections will be at. So do we have a click? Go ahead and click. We'll start where we always do, which is our mission. There we go. We'll start with our mission and strategic directions. And as you know, everything that we do, we want to be sure that those strategic directions are our priority. I think tonight, as we talk about budget and as we talk about budget over the next several months, really to be ensuring that we're spending our finances on those things which our improvement theories show are the things that are going to most move the needle in order for that mission to come to life for every single one of our students. The next slide just depicts, you've seen this a number of times, board members, this is just our visual for our district continuous improvement process. So each year in the spring, we bring recommendations to you after we've gone through a year of the district goal setting process to see where we're at, and then we bring forward recommendations in terms of what our focus areas should be under each of those strategic directions that you've approved. That also sets school board goals, it sets my goals, it sets our team goals. We also have been working over the last couple of years on really looking at what are those high levels that the district scorecard measures that really we want to look at and have our public look at a really high level. So that's gone through multiple iterations, and really excited about the work that Krislin's continued to do with our leaders to get that to a place where we say, okay, here are really those indicators that we want to pay attention to at a very high level, knowing that our departments and our buildings and our teacher teams are working at a different level. And then the priority work, as you know, that's that green and purple work that our improvement theory is. If we can continue to do these things well, those strategic direction goals will be met. The department and the school improvement plans then are those foundational action plans and strategies that all of our district leaders use to guide the goals in their particular department or buildings. Our building instructional leadership teams work closely with our principals and then with the whole staff to ensure that they are monthly monitoring those goals, reviewing data. Certainly at this midpoint time, our teachers are working really diligently with our administrators, reviewing interim data, taking a look kid by kid to say where do adjustments need to be made, what do we need to be doing to ensure success at the end of the year. And that work really happens in our collaborative learning teams. That's really the place that work at an individual student basis happens, and our teachers do a fantastic job on that. And then as we go around the circle, continuing to help students build agency and make sure that they also are very well aware of where they are in their own learning progression. So just wanted to review that cycle that is ongoing for us. And with that, Chrislyn, I'm going to hand it over to Chrislyn, who's going to share some information on the scorecard, taking a look at some of our projections based on our mid-year MAP data. And then I'll come back and talk in a little bit about our operational plan and priority.
All right, so you've seen the current iteration of the scorecard, and I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining how it's set up and help you make some interpretations from that. So I'm going to use the laser pointer over on this one. Okay, so the numbers here correspond to the strategic direction. So this is the front page of it. This is the second page. So you see 1 through 6. Those are the strategic directions. And then underneath those strategic directions are all the different measures that we're looking at to give us some information about how we're moving forward toward those. You'll see some blanks. Some of the years we don't necessarily have information from in the past, and that is either because that wasn't a measure that we were looking at in the past, or the data is not necessarily in the student information system. In that case, like, I'm taking steps to make sure that that does happen so that we can then report these numbers out. And then some of them, there is a gap, like in graduation rate for 2018-19, because those don't officially get released until later in the year. So as those come out, that will get filled in, but the idea would be that this would be something that would be complete for the prior year in the fall. So as part of the achievement report that you see in the fall, you would also see the rest of the scorecard. Okay, so then I'll walk you through a little bit of this, and please make sure you ask questions as you have those. So the first one is all students ready for kindergarten. These follow the World's Best Workforce goals that we have. So all students ready for kindergarten, leading to students reading grade level by 3rd grade, closing gaps, making sure students are college and career ready, and then students graduating. So we're looking at kindergartners meeting literacy benchmarks. So that would be students who are involved in our preschool, meeting those targets as they enter kindergarten. And then moving on to 3rd grade, all students reading at grade level by 3rd grade. The target there was set, and this one as well, on 80% by the year 2022. So that's where those target numbers come from. Okay, then moving on to this next set of all gaps closed, you see that these numbers don't have any units next to them. So these are percentage points. So if we look at the gap between white students and students of color in reading from 16-17 to 17-18 to 18-19 was relatively stable. So that means there were 13 percentage points between students of color and white students. And then the next year that narrowed a bit, and it was just 10 percentage points and then widened a bit. But just a few percentage points. Actually, in a district of this size, we look at stability. I'm looking for some difference, like in the 5 to 8 percentage point range, to show some difference. And in that trend over time, too, I'd want to see that trend narrowing. That said, good place to aim for this next school year. Of course, we want to keep bringing that down because we want that to be narrowed. Some of that narrowing can come from the narrowing of gaps between other groups. So this is the gap between English learners and non-English learners. So there are 51 percentage points between the scores of English language learners and non-English language learners. Again, I want to make sure that people understand that this is a reading test, so it's students who are English learners. And they're learning to read, so like we would expect some gap, because if there were no gap, then they wouldn't be receiving English language services. Okay, we still want that to narrow, of course. We don't want it to be that big, but we wouldn't necessarily expect it to be that. Okay, then moving on, students receiving free and reduced price meals. We can see that that's been really stable over the past couple of years. Like to see that come down, continue to narrow that gap. And then the gap between students receiving special ed services, it's been around 40, came down a little bit. We'd like to see that trend continue down. All right, any questions so far? Yep.
Just quickly, can you remind me, does the target get dictated by the state, or is that something that you establish as an administrative team?
These are set, and these targets came from getting to 20% proficiency by 2022.
Oh, got it. So it's just a matter of numbers. I just got it. Based on
80%
our
80% proficiency.
proficient, right? I'm sorry, I didn't make that jump.
Kristin, are these numbers based upon measurements taken in the fall or the spring, or the average between both of them?
These are all the end summative scorecard things. So these are MCA 3 readings. So this MCA is always given in the spring of every year.
Okay.
You're going to see a little bit later some mid-year updates with projections, which comes from map data, and I'll talk a little bit about fall and winter projections in that. But this is all kind of summative end of.
So it's safe to say that the first, when it says MCA 3, that actually trickles down into everything through number 1 and continues into number 2 for those numbers? Or?
Right, all, anything here, this is all MCA 3 reading, unless it's otherwise noted. So ACT score, it explains what those are.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Then we move on to that next category, students being college and career ready. So we're looking at a couple of different indicators before students are actually at that point. So we're looking at the percent of 8th graders taking algebra and earning a C or better. And 8th grade students proficient on the MCA 3 science. We know that both of these, especially that students passing algebra correlates with high school graduation. And the 8th grade students proficient on the MCA 3 in science and the science section of the ACT. Then we put that ACT score on there. Seniors earning post-secondary credit before graduation. This wasn't calculated in the past, but I started looking into it for where we are as far as on track for this year. And so far we've got 63% of current seniors are on track to earn credit, and that doesn't even take into account credit that current seniors might have earned in their 9th, 10th, or 11th grade year. So that's looking really strong, especially for a district this size. So that's a positive. Then we've got high school students involved in at least one co-curricular activity for the last number of years. And then our graduation rate, which I already talked about, that will come out in the spring as that's published. It will go on here. Then this is a new measure, the percent of Prior Lake High School students not at risk. So we have a dropout early warning system. This is a calculation that looks at attendance, behavior, and grades. And it helps administrators and teachers at the high school level find students before they're struggling too much. So that's why it's called an early warning system, to help make sure that students don't get off track and can make the grade, that they can be at school, that they can figure out positive ways to solve issues so they're not missing class because of behavior issues. And currently, there's only 2% or so of students that are falling into that category, and I know that deans, administrators, counselors, and teachers are all in contact with students, so it's really a great measure to make sure that no student's falling through any cracks, that every student's connected, especially when they're showing some signs that they might need some help. We want to intervene before a student does fail the class or, is absent too much. All right, any questions so far? Okay. Then to get some other perspective, we're looking at some survey items from looking forward to going to school, and that's related to the school engagement. So we've got those divided by elementary and secondary, so you can see where the splits are. Then we move into strategic direction 2. This is a measure that was in the previous iteration of the scorecard, so you're familiar with that, as well as the financial accountability. We're looking at utilities being under $1 per square foot per year. And then as the state and all districts in the state actually are looking at reporting about teacher, staff, and leader diversity in their school districts, we're coming up with how that will be reported and how it will be reported publicly, same as every school district, so that will be a measure you'll see in the fall.
Kristen, I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
And the under $1 per square foot, I mean,
Yes.
I understand the concept of that, but the school district has no control if utilities all of a sudden go high or anything like that. Is there a way to put a percentage on that?
So,
instead?
Mary, what we can control is consumption.
Okay.
And that's what we work really hard on.
Okay.
And we will see an uptick in that because construction is intensive with utilities. But it really is, it's about consumption, not pricing.
Should it be then phrased as a measurable goal as a percentage of overall operational cost per square foot or something like that? Something to be a little bit, I mean, if all of a sudden, electricity and, and oil prices and natural gas prices go through the roof for some reason, it makes it look like we're not meeting that measure, yet our consumption, as a ratio would stay the same. I'm just wondering how to normalize that.
I think that is all squared away in the reporting that we get from Margaret Bishop, who tracks our utilities.
Okay.
So, but I definitely will ask that question.
Yeah, and let's look at how Margaret tracks it, because maybe there is, if there's some kind of percentage or something that makes more sense, we could look at
Right.
that. We just wanna be sure we've got a placeholder for it in the scorecard, but maybe she does have something that would make more sense for us.
Sure.
Yeah, the point of this is not to be a hard and fast thing that 25 years from now that we are still looking at, but rather like to
Yeah,
give
yeah.
Exactly,
like,
that's what-
yeah.
parameters on there. Okay, so then we'll go to page 2. So this is where, looking at strategic direction 3, we're getting a lot of perception data here. So looking at the innovation and improving the learner experience. So finding out if parents feel like their children are appropriately challenged academically at their individual level. That ties into the personalized learning as well. The student survey items around my teacher knows how to teach so that I can learn. And then feedback from staff about working in an environment that supports innovative ideas and practices. Okay, then moving on to strategic direction 4 around E-STEM focus in the district. So there's the academic subject areas that go through curriculum review process. So that set up a number of subject areas go through that review every year. And they are now also embedding environmental STEM or sustainability practices in every curricular area. And so I put in tech ed and science. Those are the 2 that are in that process right now. So starting to go through that process. And I may not always report them by writing in the subject areas, but that will be the place where I'll tell you about that. We then have recycling and compost versus waste, and so that is a statistic that we can continue to look at and see and continue to get better at. And then we've got another a unit of energy measurement here. So this is the kilo British thermal unit per square foot per year. This is the amount of energy it takes to increase a gallon of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. So that something I've gotten right there, and will continue to be reporting that. That's something that's publicly available as well. Any questions?
Can I take you back to one
Yep.
section?
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, the changes over our 3-year window in here, for most of these things, seem like they're probably statistically almost insignificant. The one that I'm
Yep.
just surprised by is our support staff
Mm-hmm.
seeing a 10% drop in a year. Do we have any sense of where that change comes from?
I don't currently,
I don't know how we would.
don't have any investigation
Yeah,
into it at
yeah.
the current moment. Okay, let's see, I would note that that participation rate was, around a third of the staff. So fluctuations of 10 percentage points may or may not. That said, the year previously, it was also
38.
around the same. Okay, moving on to the 5th strategic direction, so safe, secure, supportive environment, nurturing social, emotional well-being of all learners. That's another clear place for perception, so survey items are included there. And then in the last strategic direction, engaging students, parents, families, communities to strengthen a culture of respect and inclusion. Again, lots of perception data. Let me see what I want to point out there. So we have items around culture, religion, ethnic heritage respected by other students, and people's pride in being associated with Prior Lake Cemetery Schools and its brand. What kinds of questions have you got for me about this one? Yep.
Quick question. The percentages reflect the approve, agree, and exceptionally agree, or the middle
Right,
and the
agree and
top.
strongly agree.
Okay.
So neutral is not included in that.
Right. Is there any way we can break that down to see how many we actually move from agree to strongly agree? Because
Well, we don't have individual, respondents, like we can't follow a particular person from one year to the next, like we might be able to see changes in a
I'm not
group.
looking at the individual, I'm just looking at how many did agree one year and how many did strongly agree, and then for the same question, the next year, what the percentages were between those two instead of adding them together. Because if, let's say, the 95% total is 90% agree and 5% strongly agree, I think that also sends us a message, or vice versa.
Yes, so I think that's definitely something that I can provide to you, but I think for the purposes of the general scorecard, looking at an overview, probably most appropriate to be a little bit more general here, and I'm happy to, like when the survey results come out, make sure that you have all of the categories.
And we look at, that, Mary, to see what some of those shifts look like. I know our building leaders and department leaders look at that data. The purpose of the scorecard is a pretty high level. We want to ask ourselves, what do we care about? What do we want to be held accountable to, and publicly make sure that we're sharing input on? I have a big concern when the only measure that schools get judged by is MCA results, because I know we all care about MCAs and we care about a lot of other things, and I think that's really the purpose of the scorecard, is to say, okay, what other things really matter to us that we're working on, that we want to be sure are a part of our overall accountability system at a really high level.
And I get that, but if we get a greater percentage and agree, then maybe we should not just dismiss that at, let's say, a 95 or 100, well, not 100, but like an 83% or something like that, because we may need to refocus on that because people are teetering the other way, or the survey's
Agreed.
teetering.
Yep.
And that's what I'm
that's the
interested
kind
in.
of like work that we would do, but we wouldn't necessarily report in that detail out.
Okay. All right, let's move on, and we've got some projections and mid-year student data.
Okay, so so these projections also, I aligned with those world's best workforce ideas again, just to keep some common threads and things we can kind of connect to. So the first place I went to was all third graders can read at grade level. And this was a really exciting thing we did this year. So you might know about the phonics pilot that we did. So we were looking at all of the classrooms in the fall where half of the students or more needed, or like, sorry, let me start over. I'm really excited about this phonics project because I have some proof here about like how it's affecting student success, and it's affecting student success really positively. So from our lens, one thing we look at is to find out if a class might need a class-wide intervention. Every student has a screener. If 50% or more of the students come back as below the benchmark, that means the classroom needs some type of screener. Okay, so in the fall, with more than half of students above the benchmark, so these are students who would not have needed the screener. These are the percentage of classrooms that didn't need the screener. Is that clear? Any questions? Yeah, this is the percent of classrooms who made that benchmark did not have 50% of the kids.
So not students, classrooms.
Classrooms, yep.
Classrooms that did not.
Classrooms that did not need the screener.
Okay,
So
so they're
did not
okay.
need the intervention.
Okay, so
because
they're
they
good.
had the screener.
They're okay.
Okay, then we piloted the phonic curriculum. One thing that made me super proud of Prior Lake teachers in kindergarten was the teamwork that was happening and how teachers were sharing what was happening in their classroom and how they were doing different things, how they were teaching phonics. And so the pilot really got spread out a lot further. And in our winter data, these were 88% of the classrooms did not need any more support. So this means in first grade there was one classroom out of the 26 first grade classrooms we had that needed support as a whole classroom. So this is really great, and it really shows us like explicit phonics instruction. Students learn phonics, and this is part of what, a big part of what that literacy benchmark is in kindergarten and first grade and winter. So that's great. That's really gonna, the reason I put that in is that's really gonna set up these classes as they go forward when they're hitting third grade for being ready and being on target for grade
And
level
just to
reading.
finish up on that phonics conversation, you should have seen in my newsletter, that sorry it didn't get sent to this morning. But we did adopt the foundations. I think there were 3 different phonics that were piloted, but the team did determine that. So excited, there's a multi-year implementation that we'll be looking at with that.
When visiting at Westwood, a couple of the teachers who were using it were there, and they had told me just on National Education Week when we were in giving, with bars, talking about that program and how it kind of became part of the entire day because of how frequently these kids would say something and it would be triggering what they were learning at other times. And I actually, when I was in the classroom with them and they were doing some math work, and I saw that where kids are pointing out, this is this word. It was encouraging. And they were excited about it at the time.
I can't remember, it's been a very long time since I've gotten a letter of support from a parent about a program. And I got parents from a Red Tail student just out of the blue about a week and a half ago sent a letter and just said, I want to just provide a letter of support for the foundations. I'm talking about the growth that his daughter had. So that was kind of cool too.
All right, super. Okay, moving on. So now we're going to be looking at third grade data. So this goes back to so the winter 2019 map projection for the MCA last year. So this is from last school year in the winter in third grade. The projection of how students would do on last spring's MCA, the projection was that it would be 59% of students proficient. Then students actually took the MCA, and this was the result. It was 64% proficient. And then we've got this year, this winter's map projection for the MCA is 62% proficient with our goal of 69% proficiency. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's what we're looking at, for reading for this year,
So I have a question.
in third grade only.
Obviously, we want all third graders to read at grade level because it's such a
Yes.
pivotal year. So when we get these test results, when we got them last year or this year, are we planning on doing the phonics program again? Are we planning on putting
Yeah.
reading
Yes.
interventions
Yeah.
in?
Yes, so the, do you wanna take that?
Well, the phonics program was piloted this year, so that will be implemented the following year.
And the next year, so it'll be a 2-year implementation.
Yep.
And that will go from kindergarten to third grade.
That's kind of what I was asking. So if the third graders, let's say if we still have, even if we meet our goal, we still have 30% of the third graders not reading at grade level, what are we doing to make that a better score, obviously? I understand our goal, but I'm just wondering, because to me, I mean, that's 30% of the kids, that's still
Yeah.
nowhere near where we'd like our third graders to be.
And that's
Right.
the everyday work of our teachers and of our learning teams, and looking, at tons of work samples, tons of data from our students, and continuing to implement with fidelity. I think that's where the phonics will help us as we look at that balanced literacy system and all components. That phonics piece will be an important piece. I think guided reading is probably the area that our teachers have really leaned into and gotten even better about, the small group reading with our students. So it's all those things. I think, we feel good about the curriculum, and we just have to continue to support our teachers, build their capacity in terms of really being able to diagnose what's those right interventions as students aren't at a particular level yet that they want to be.
So,
From a-
are we gonna put reading interventionists in the third grade level and the fourth grade to help with this? Or, cause right now, doesn't it stop at second grade or something?
A reading intervention goes
Is
to.
that what it's called? I may not be using the right
Yeah.
term.
Right, like, so there are interventionists,
Yes.
but they also, it doesn't mean that there's no intervention happening beyond second grade. So, even in fifth grade, I was, with Sean's team, and they were telling me, at the beginning of the year, how, they had some, comprehension interventions, and then they were looking at, data from their students to help them decide, okay, should they be getting a vocabulary intervention? Should they be getting a comprehension intervention? So it's, even without an interventionist assigned, teachers are still working hard to identify groups of students that need particular skill building and making that happen.
And that's really the foundation of MTSS, is looking at that. And, I think that's why, as we look at times that teachers have with the What I Need time or things like that, where they're grouping kids and sharing kids and saying, I'll take these students, for a particular intervention. So they're owning that work as well.
So we don't have extra help though coming in like we do at the younger levels. The teacher then, if they have, and I know this probably, it's not even, obviously every class is different, but if I'm a teacher and I've got 30% of my class, just say, not reading at grade level, then the teacher then does the extra work themselves? Or
Yeah.
we bring in specialists to make sure when they get into, or, try to get into fourth grade and fifth grade, that this is mitigated, at least, because you can't control everything, I get that. But I'm just wondering, are we putting it all back on the same teachers? Because in kindergarten through second grade, don't they get extra help?
We were using the interventionists this year to, or one of the things that we're doing with the interventionists, or one of the supports interventionists are providing, are when a classroom is identified with half of the students or more needing some intervention, we're doing class-wide interventions, and the interventionists are teaching the teachers how to do that. So at that point, the intervention is something that's provided for all of the students in the class, and that our teachers are getting skilled up and able to provide that on their own, so that then interventionists can go help yet other people.
So this isn't directly a pullout once you get to the intermediate grades, but, as Dr. Staloch was saying too, principals are a key role in this as well, is a lot of times after the data comes through from assessments, they'll have data days where they break down, okay, mid-year, let's look at the students that are in your classroom, again, working with the teachers, talking about, what are those strategies that we're currently doing? What's the next 3 weeks? What's the next month look like? Relative to what the students are showing in their areas of deficiency as well as their areas of proficiency. We have our teachers on special assignment. We have elementary curriculum specialists, secondary curriculum specialists that also provide support, and certainly our peer coaches. Peer coaches are meeting with staff, talking about peer cognitive coaching, but also instructional, giving teachers feedback on how they're instructing either in small group, whole group, selection of activities that they're using with students, whether it be student groups that are showing proficiency and need enrichment, or students that need additional support. So from a support standpoint, I guess the system is built on, teacher, student, but from there, the team, the site team, building, and then the district, and how are we using the data that we have? This is one data point. How are we looking at our formative, summative assessments to see where students are at, and really ensuring that they're getting the support they need, whether it be through another specialist, if it is a pull-out, or if it is something that they can be differentiated into the classroom.
The only other thing I wanna touch on, and I know we need to get on, because we got a
I'm
huge night in
sorry.
front of us, is where we know we need to improve. And this is where we've spent a ton of our time, is core instruction. We would hope that 80% of our students reach proficiency, and then we have a smaller number of students who need intervention. So perhaps one FTE, one at every elementary would help more. So that's really what we wanna continue to focus on, is how do we ensure core instruction is solid and kids are learning through that? Because really, that number that we want is 80% of our kids meeting proficiency through core instruction, and then we have interventionists to support work. Gonna keep moving.
Okay, I'll keep going. So with those scores that you saw, I would make the prediction of stability for the MCAs in 3rd grade for this spring. Okay, then the next area is around all achievement gaps closing. So I've just chosen 3rd grade to look at math and reading. So by race and ethnic group, this is the projection based on winter 2020 MAP scores for what students would achieve in spring on their MCA. So in the column on the left, this is the projected MCA score of 3rd graders in math, and then this is the gap projection right there. So that means there would be 39 percentage points between this group's and this group's results. And then I compared those to the gaps that existed from the MCA last year. Okay, any questions there?
I do have one question, and I don't wanna dwell on it, I'm just wondering if you have the numbers, and I'm just thinking about this now, so I apologize for not asking this earlier, but if you just did the difference between free and reduced lunch and the gap, is there, is it averaging out to be about the same, or?
Our
as
our FRP gaps, free reduced price lunch gaps, similar to students of color and white gaps.
Well, just in general, do you see the same gap between them on, if you average the ones,
So use race and ethnic groups divided into free reduced price lunch or not.
Yes.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yep. Then this is the same data looking at reading going forward, so that you can see those gaps are really similar. There's a dash there because there are too few students in 3rd grade last year to come up with a percent. You'll see a negative number, and that it means the opposite. That means that that group did better. Okay. Then if we move on to reading, now we're looking at grades 3 through 8. But the MAP test is not taken by 10th graders. So last year on the MCA we had not a 69% proficiency. The fall MAP projection for that was 65%. We didn't have a winter projection because not all schools took the MAP in in winter last year, but we do have a winter projection now of 63%. And then I did some cohort tables for you, so you can see that this is the current grade. They're currently in 3rd grade. Last year they were in 2nd grade, so there was no MCA, and this is the current projection for them. So 4th grade, this is what that cohort did when they were in 3rd grade. This is what they're projected to do in spring.
Have we consistently tested SAGE as part of this too, or have they been?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, moving on, this is now math with the same statistics on the top and then the same cohort data going through. Any questions?
And just so you know, I want you to know, and it's later on in the slide, but the work that we're doing right now with admin, I'm meeting with Jeff and I are meeting with every principal. We're reviewing their skip. They're talking about where they're making adjustments, where they're not. Learning teams, most elementary learning teams especially, are having data days where they're digging into this. So I just want you to be assured that there is a huge amount of both urgency and intentional planning, work, and analysis that's happening at this time of the year. So.
Okay, then moving on to the college and career ready section. I talked about that earlier. Currently, 2% of students showing up in that in the DO system, dropout early warning system, looking at attendance, behavior, and grades, making sure we catch kids on the front end before there are issues. And then I told you earlier as well about 63% of seniors currently enrolled in those college credit bearing courses. All right, so just some general insights overall. The phonics pilots and press interventions are really resulting in some measurable student success. We expect to see that continue going forward. We've got benchmark data guiding school grade level and classroom responses to achievement and gaps. So just Friday morning I was at Glendale working with their building instructional leadership team, going deeper into the MAP data and helping teachers figure out like what their next actual steps are with teaching. That DO system providing student level data and the high percentage of seniors set up to earn college credit. I will now turn that back over to Terry.
Yep, so I just wanted to touch base again that the work that our building instructional leadership teams, learning teams are doing right now, along with leaning into Jeff's team to, whether it's Crystalline or whether it's Gwen working with the reading, but really working to say, okay, we had a plan at the beginning of the year. Let's take a look at how that went, what our results at mid-year look like, and what adjustments need to be made at that time.
A quick question, I don't want to pull us too far off. I asked some of the admin this via email without a need for a reply. I don't know if it's more appropriate to ask here or to ask at our priority work session, but I know we've got the achievement integration plan on our consent agenda, and we're talking about world's best workforce and the gaps there. Would this be an appropriate place to ask that question?
Yeah,
and
you know what, I think it's perfect. We know that Jeff and Kevin will actually, at the March 9th board meeting, we'll get a priority, a report on that. But I think it's absolutely appropriate if you've got a question, because that's on the board agenda coming up. Just your question about, I'll let Jeff take it, what is it,
It's just how it fits in the overall scheme and,
Well,
which is a big deal, I know.
What I love about this presentation is you see snippets of equity, personalized education,
Everything.
achievement gaps, all sprinkled into everything.
Right.
there we go.
And I think as we look at our strategic plan, I mean, that's where our work in equity always starts.
Right.
Strategic plan,
Right.
world's best workforce, and all the different things that are happening. And so from a scorecard's metrics,
Yeah.
for world's best workforce, we have to track and we have to have plans around what are we going to do to address the achievement gap.
Yeah.
And so you saw the data here tonight, you saw the projection and looking at data where we anticipate and where we can intervene, or we can meet with students where they're at to kind of get them over the hump here. That's the
Yeah.
importance part of fall,
Right.
mid-year, and then end of the
Right.
year. But I think too, I think the district story has really been, in the past 3 years, our work under educational equity with our strategic plan here with 1E. And what we studied with other districts have been doing, we've been doing professional development for all staff. And that's been our focus on, again, providing staff the tools to work with all students. And it's been on student engagement. We've had over half the staff participate in a cohort where they're working with independent coaching with other staff, with other people outside the district, and give them direct feedback on student engagement, working on instructional strategies. We've got groups that are working on academic vocabulary, and so it's starting to get into that instructional focus, in addition to the work of the why. Why is this important? And so, and we've talked too each of the last 3 years about the work of Reimagine Minnesota and how that work is aligning up very well with what we're doing as a district. But achievement integration is
that just
part
a
of that.
slice? That's
It's
what
a
I was
slice
gonna
of
ask.
it.
It's just a slice of what we're doing,
Yes,
right?
it's a slice
There's
of
some
it. It's not the
confusion.
district's equity and education plan.
Right, okay.
We've had, those of you that have been on the board, we've had the Achievement Integration Collaborative with Shakopee and Jordan
Right.
for over a dozen years. I think it was back in 2008.
Yeah.
When it first started. It is grounded in statute, and the intent of that is, again, collaboration in order to reduce racial disparities, provide access to programs, staff, professional development, and achievement integration is a way to provide more revenue in order to address the plans that districts are working on. So, as a school district, we've levied $18,500 for achievement integration plans each of over the last 10 years. The district could access more of that funding, but that comes through levy certification. One of the things too is that our work with educational equity over the last several years has put us in a position which we shared during the fall budget conversations. I'm trying to set you up here.
Yeah, great.
For additional revenue, looking at achievement integration through that levy certification process. And so the plan that you see in the board packet coming up at the regular meeting outlines the things that we're looking to use those dollars for, just for access, for transportation, our Native American liaison, East African liaison. Our Somali population is our second largest group. And so we are identifying needs that we need to find ways to connect with families and also provide additional level of support. The other component to that too is utilizing some of our secondary deans, time relative to attendance, engagement, behavior, because all of those components are associated with when kids are in school, they're more successful and engaged with the core curriculum. And so the funding for that, as a board, authorized additional funds in order to access that for the plan, which will really support our ongoing educational equity.
Does some funding come just by being identified by MDE that we're gonna be collaborating with Jordan and Shaq? Okay.
No.
That's our own request.
We have
Yeah, okay.
we have to request that, have a formalized plan. It's that, again, that relationship with Shakopee and Jordan, and that's a collaborative group that meets several times a year to talk about, how do we get students together, how do we open up opportunities. I know they've had caring and committed conversations.
Yep.
They've organized college visits, post-secondary visits. So it's a slice of really the work that we're doing with educational equity.
Yeah.
It's, and
And
again.
that was my sense, but I know I
Yeah.
think people from outside who see that or saw it on the consent agenda were worried that that was our excellence in equity sort of plan.
And that's,
it's
that's
just a
fair.
piece of it,
If
right?
they saw that our plan from 2017 to 2020 was $18,000 and thought that that's all we're
Right.
investing, that's,
Thank you.
yeah, that's
I just want to be
fair.
solid
Yeah.
in that. And very quickly to follow from the evaluation point of view, so the one we had for the 3 years prior, if those goals aren't met, do we continue to not let up on those goals?
So through achievement integration or through the goals in
Well, so
general?
like if you look at the achievement and integration from 2017 to 2020, did I just do that right? The 3 years prior, if it had certain goals set out, if those goals weren't met, do we continue to kind of follow
Yes.
through, even though we've kind of adjusted what we're putting that money toward?
So every year, we have to provide an annual report to the MDE of how, if we achieve achieved or did not
Okay.
achieve the goals in our achievement
Thank you.
integration plan. And so last year, we achieved many of those goals. There were, I think, off the top of my head, I think there were a couple we did not.
There were some big ones,
But
yeah.
those did carry over into the subsequent achievement integration
Got it.
plan moving forward.
Thank you, and I can ask more offline, I just wanted to
Sure.
have that
Yeah.
sense before,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And one thing, before we go into the budget, I did ask something about our goals. And is there anything you guys can tell the board that would put, is something that we have in our control that would put us at risk of meeting these goals? Is it funding, is it personnel, is it, what? I mean, what is it that we have identified as a risk to meeting some of these goals?
You know, I've got in my, I guess, my perspective, and then Dr. Staloch, I'm sure you've got thoughts on it, I'm sure you've got thoughts on it too, Kristlyn, but, you know, the work that we're doing with the strategic plan, I mean, I think if we need to maintain our momentum on personalized learning in order to meet the students where they're at. Continuing to work on that and engaging students, because when you're personalizing, you're seeing where each kid is at individually, what their strengths, what their areas of development are, and then really supporting teachers with the tools, whether it be time, resources, or additional staffing when we have the dollars to do that, in order to provide additional support to students so that they can make those gains. The other one too is, I would say, the things that we're putting in place, like you heard tonight, foundations, the phonics, with everything that we do with curriculum, it's all about, you know, we roll it out, we train teachers, we purchase it, we provide professional development. The next part is fidelity to the implementation. You know, instructional staff using it the way it's intended to, using it to fidelity, collaborating together, building principals engaged with the curriculum, doing their walkthroughs, making sure the tools and strategies that are being identified by the district through best practice are to be implemented, are indeed being implemented. And then we support teachers so that they continue to get that additional training. I mean, it's kind of.
So I guess, let me just, let's say if we all of a sudden had a funding issue, or all of a sudden had a major, even an increased teacher shortage or para shortage or something like that, is that something that could put this in risk? I'm kind of, because everything you described to me is, our own efforts, which we have control over. I'm kind of wondering, what is it that we're looking at that we may not have control over?
There's 1,000 things, Mary. I mean, there's a 1,000 things. We welcome the kids where they are on their learning journey. And so there's, with each one of our 9,000 kids come differences and gifts and learning styles, so, even, I was just thinking about your question, and, I was in a kindergarten classroom last week, and so 5 and 6-year-olds. And I saw students, they were doing a sample writing, they were writing a hypothesis for their science experiment. And some of them were writing in complete sentences as 5 and 6-year-olds. And some of them were still very creative spelling, so you think about where they come, right? And all of those things, how they learn, puts us at risk about how we need to be sure we're meeting their needs so that they exit kindergarten reading at a level D or whatever that is.
I think too, the other part is being able to pivot. If the data is informing us of something, good, bad, or indifferent, being able to pivot to make adjustments for students. That happens in the classroom every day when teachers are working with students. It becomes a little bit more cumbersome from a district level if you're looking at missing a resource. You usually have to gather feedback, and we have those loops that are built in. And at that point, when you identify the resource that might be missing or might be needed, then there's that process where you go through to identify what is that, what's the cost, how do we factor that into current budgets, is there something we need to carry over in order to fund that moving forward, or if it's something that's really necessary, it's coming to the board and talking to the board about an identified need and identifying the process, sharing the process, and talking about, here's what we believe we need in order to address this issue. And I think that's
The last thing I'll say on that, because I know we need to go on, is, I think we're also learning a lot about, ensuring that we have high expectations for all kids. And some of that becomes a mindset, and a skill set issue. And just making sure that every student that's in front of us, we believe can learn at high levels, and we hold those high expectations and high levels of support to make sure that happens. I'm gonna really briefly, just review the next, in your packet, then you have a review of our priority work. And I just wanted to remind you, we've really tried throughout the year to provide that ongoing input or reports to you so that you know where we're at with each of them. So just as we look at the purple work, which is really the developmental work that we have, the personalized learning, we'll get an update on that on March 9th. So at the board meeting, 1A, I think it is, yeah, thanks if you just wanna go to that. They have the document in their packet as well. MTSS, we heard in January. Jeff just spoke about the educational equity and excellence. We'll get an update on that also on March 9th. The 2B, the construction work, and the finances around that has been ongoing. 4A, we'll look at when that's coming. I don't think we have that scheduled yet. We have a team that's been working on the E-STEM work around that. The 5A part, the SEL you heard in January, and then the stakeholder information we heard in December. So you've heard a lot of that, and we've got a couple big updates for you in March as well. Thank you.
And that was your district priority?
That was it,
Very
yes.
good.
Wow.
Yes. Very concise. Move on to the budget. Julie?
So we'll start off talking a little bit about where we're at with the budget. As you know, we always kind of talk about the budget in terms of the guiding principles and how we create and work with the budget and where the money goes, and it's really based on these strategic directions. This is the outcomes that for this presentation, reviewing our revenue and expenditure assumptions, provide the administration direction on those parameters, and maintain our, and by doing that, the intention is to maintain our fund balance between 8 and 12%, restore our class size ratios. Our open enrollment parameters, the board approved, and that's what a lot of this is based on as far as enrollment. And then any strategies for increasing revenues or decreasing expenditures. Here's our budget timeline. We have the board approve this always in July or August of the previous, so last July or August we approved this. This is kind of, we've had some change in our dates of our board meetings, but other than that, we kind of go through this every year, kind of working through the budget process, making sure that we're hitting all of these pieces that have an impact on the budget for enrollment, and we're constantly monitoring that enrollment. Where are we at with staffing, program additions, or reductions in programs as things change. And then of course, the other piece is the legislative changes. Trying to predict what the legislature will do is never easy, so we really look at all of that as we're going through this budget process. We've seen some of these slides before, but I think they're good reviews, as a basic formula hasn't kept up with inflation, so you can see, why do we have an issue? It's mainly as we just can't keep up with inflation. And you'll see as we go through some of these slides, the years that we didn't get any increases from the state, and how that affects our district as we move forward. One of the things that I wanted to start with is, and this is, I just added this to your board packet, but you've seen these, you've approved all these budgets. But if we kind of do a little history, just even a year ago, where we were at, I'm kind of talking through what we needed for our budget for the current year. And these are the things that we were talking about, is we were estimating a 2% increase in the formula. So you can see that change. We had talked about increasing our enrollment by 252 students. And so that's kind of where our total revenue increase came from. And then you can see our expenditure assumptions. We had all of these expenditures. We were kind of looking at adding staffing, simply because we're opening new buildings and we have some of those needs as we were growing. and looking at special education, all of those different areas. And so way back last June, the board had made some decisions that, and approved a budget based on these parameters, that we were overspending a little over $2 million at that point. Knowing that our fund balance at that time was over our fund balance policy of 8 to 12%. So we knew that, and the board felt that it was best that that money was being used for classrooms. And so that was one of the reasons that we looked at that. Some of these pieces, and just if, you know, like if you look at construction allocation from capital, that's not something that we would have every year. So some of these are one-time costs, and some of these are ongoing. So as we work through this, and we talked about that back then, but this was kind of what it looked like. And this was what the board approved back then. You can see our total revenues. Let me see if I can actually, this word, oh, nope. We're $102 million, our expenditure's 104. Where's the pointer on that? So,
No, that's not the one.
yeah, I tried that one too. So, it's just kind of a little history of why did we do what we did back then? And so I wanted you to understand, oh, it's the middle.
It's the middle one.
Okay, thanks. So.
The unidentified one.
Yeah, so, you know, we already started, we kind of went down this road a little bit, knowing that our fund balance was a little over our projections, so the thought is, let's put more money in the classrooms. So a lot changes between June, of which you're trying to make, when you're trying to do a budget for schools, you're doing everything based on an assumption. Your kids aren't enrolled yet. You're trying to base it on something, maybe the legislature has convened and maybe it hasn't. And so some of these things really are based on trend, or they're based on actuals if we know what the legislature is doing. And here, so we know that we didn't have as many students enroll in our district as we anticipated in June. And so we came back in December and the board approved an updated budget based on only 50 students, and then a total increase of only $1.6 million. And then these are the expenditure assumptions we had back then, in just 2 months ago, really, in essence. This is what the board approved for a final budget for the current year. And so you can see that we were overspending at that point, and again, for good reasons. I mean, we still do have a fund balance. The board has, you know, the pieces that we are a people-driven organization. And so when you're a people-driven organization, when you hire people in the middle, you know, to make some changes in the middle of the year is difficult. And so, and we have wage and salary increases, all of those things continue. As part of this, and you can see this is where we ended up as a final budget, with almost $102 million in revenues and $105 million in expenditures. However, I want to point out, here's where we still anticipated our fund balance to be at the end of this year is 11.15%. So our fund balance policy is 8 to 12, so we're still within our fund balance policy. So the other piece of it that I wanted to, just before I move on, is just to talk about, the board also made some decisions around open enrollment, knowing that our enrollment was low this year. We had capacity, we talked a lot about the capacity in our district and in our schools, and so some decisions were made and changed about open enrollment to allow us to more fully utilize our spaces until our resident students are available to fill in. So if we kind of look through this enrollment comparisons, and we've talked about this a lot, but I just want to reiterate that this is how we got to the place that we are right now. Is our enrollment, you can see, was quickly growing up through 16-17, and in fact we grew throughout the year. We made some decisions based on open enrollment and space in our schools, again, capacity, and you can see that that quickly changed in the next 3 years, where we dropped off in enrollment from year to year instead of gaining throughout the year. Here's our enrollment history, and again, again, we've talked through this, but you can see the big pieces that we often talk about are these two small areas here, are open enrollment in and out. And it has changed, but not significantly. Our delta through these two is about 350 kids, 400 kids, you know, so we're not talking a lot of students pre-K-12 even. Here's our district grade level. Our average is just under 700 students, and you can see, we talk about this a lot as this district isn't necessarily a first-time homebuyer district. We have a lot of people that move into our district when their children are in the middle of the schools and even in the high schools. They don't necessarily come to us in kindergarten and then the elementary levels, simply because the housing here is expensive. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's a higher, and it's difficult to find low housing at a less than $300,000. And I think when talking to different realtors and even people within the district, it's just difficult for people to find, especially kids with young families, that might be kind of their limit for their housing. So we may see more growth coming, and we have typically seen more growth coming at those middle and upper levels. As we've grown throughout the years, this is a great slide to show that we have kept pace in our enrollment, or as we've grown quickly, we have staffed correctly. So our enrollment, staffing to student ratio has kept pretty steady throughout those years. And I think that's a testament to how we are making sure that our class sizes are steady. Here's our revenue per ADM. In comparison to other districts, we're here at $10,634, the lowest among us. And I'll kind of talk about why we have the least amount of revenue of other districts, but why our finances have been pretty stable, mainly is because we are a growing district. And so as we go through this, we'll talk about the differences and the different story that Prior Lake has compared to other school districts. Because certainly they have a different story to tell depending on their demographics of their kids and their, you know, there's all different things that affect a school district in terms of revenue.
So this is 17, 18. When is 18, 19 projected to?
Pretty soon here, we're, MDE is just getting all the data from all the schools. It's due at the end of December. They compile it, and so we should be seeing this coming out fairly quickly here. And as soon as I get that all updated and send it back out to the board so they can see how this last year compares. 18, 19, this is our revenue sources. You know, we talked to our legislators about revenue and where we get our money from. You can see that we get about $78 million from state sources, but some of that is special ed. Not all of that is a basic formula. So when we only are seeing 2% of our revenue, additional money coming on part of this purple area, you can see that it's overall not a 2% increase, of course, to our total revenue. Here's our expenditures, and you can see again, we're one of the lowest spending school districts among our peers and surrounding districts. Here's where we spend the majority of our expenses is in salaries and benefits, because again, we're a people organization based on education, and so majority of our expense is in salaries and benefits. Here's our fund balance trend, and you can see what's happened with our growth over the last 5 years, from 2013-14 up to 18-19. You can see our revenues increased, you know, almost $20 million over that time, even more than that because of our enrollment. And then also you can see our fund balance has pretty much stayed consistent. And this is overall fund balance. So I just want to make sure you understand this slide doesn't take into account assigned or unassigned, so this is just our overall total fund balance. This is referendum authority, and this is based on prior to any votes this last fall. And you can see how we compare to our neighbors in terms of referendum authority. and we're at 923. Shakopee only has the $300 the board approved, and Farmington is similar, is $790, and then anything, Rosemont, Lakeville, Eastern Carver County, and Burnsville all have significantly higher operating referendum authority than we do. And again, when you talk about tech levies, we don't have a tech levy, and Farmington does not either, but surrounding districts, Lakeville, Burnsville, Shakopee, Eastern Carver, Rosemont, all of those have higher operating referendums than we do, and tech levies, that we don't have access to those funds. So, and we haven't had voter approval on that, and which it requires voter approval for a technology levy or an operating referendum. So we would need that if we were to decide at some point that this was something that the board wanted to do. But it definitely makes a difference, and when you look at us and we spend $2,200 less per pupil than our surrounding districts, we're trying to educate them with a lot less money that they have access to that we do not. And if you want to continue that, here's our spending for special education. And you can see our cross subsidy is about $905 per student. So if you think about $905 per student, and our operating referendum is $923 per student, we're simply just offsetting the cost of what we're spending for special education, if you want to make it in really simple terms. So this is, when you talk about cross subsidy, this is the difference between what we receive in revenue and what we spend per student for special education services. So this has to come from the general fund. We're not going to get revenue for that. There simply is not enough money in the state. So we have to supplant that with general fund dollars to support the requirements and the mandates by special education to serve those students.
Julie?
Yes.
Very quickly, are the numbers, per student, just kids qualifying for special?
No.
It's every student?
Every
Okay.
student. This is based on ADM
Okay.
in the district. Another area of which we get additional revenue is based on the number of free and reduced lunch students that we have, and you can see over this, past decade plus of what's happened, and then through the recession, our free and reduced went up at 14 to 16%, and now we're back down in that 12% level we've come out of that. But with higher free and reduced price lunch students that you have, you also get additional revenue. And so this is our enrollment, percent of enrollment that's free and reduced compared to other districts surrounding us, again, that peer group that we talk about. But this is the revenue that they also get. So if we want to even compare ourselves to Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, they get more money for compensatory dollars than we do. They get more money in operating referendum than we do. They get more money in tech levy. So those are big areas that we're not seeing that same revenue in our district.
We also have different tax bases than we have too, correct?
They have, absolutely.
Correct.
And that's everybody's story, and that's what I'm saying. It's kind of the Prior Lake story, but if you wanna talk about comparing us to other districts, it's really difficult to do that, because when you talk about Burnsville, they're 50% free and reduced price lunch. Shakopee has a lot more industry than we do. So there's just differences in how you can pass referendums and not pass referendums just based on who bears the brunt of those taxes. But as you can see, we get about a little over $600,000 in compensatory revenue compared to a Shakopee who's looking at, has $3.5 million, $2.8 million. Burnsville's up to $10 million more. And this is 17-18 again, but this is our taxes per ADM and what we, for every student that attends our district, that's the tax burden for our taxpayers. You can see that we're a little higher in some areas, but lower in others, and overall we're less than a lot of other districts. This is a slide on revenue trends, and you can see our revenue is going up, and mainly because of additional, money from the state, additional, we do get some additional dollars for special education, but a lot of it has to do with additional enrollment as well. So if we talk about revenue budget assumptions for next year, for the 2021 school year, we already know that the legislature has approved a 2% increase in the general formula, or 65, 67 per pupil unit, and it's, including the weighting, so anybody that's in grade 7 through 12, we get 1.2% of that. So that's what, that's one of the assumptions that we're asking the board to look at and agree to. If this is something that you agree that that's appropriate, we already know that that's what it is, but if anybody thinks we should look at something different, if you think the legislature will give us some more dollars, which that would be great if they would, but when we build our budget, these are the assumptions that we build it off of. We had talked last November quite a bit about what our enrollment looks like for next year, and I want to talk a little bit about enrollment. The board has made some changes in open enrollment, and we have done some preliminary kindergarten enrollment. We've had quite a few kindergarten parents enroll their students, more than last year, which is a really good thing. I have some numbers here that I collected late today. We are up to resident students of 415 enrolled for kindergarten compared to last year at 258.
Okay,
So,
wait, this enrolled for next year?
enrolled for next year.
Did you say 415 or 400?
15,
15,
415. That doesn't include 88 open enrolled students that have applied for open enrollment. Last year, we had about 140 students apply for open enrollment in kindergarten, and this year we had 88. So that piece is down significantly compared to the past. We have room for 100 open enrolled kindergarten students into the district, and last year it was 75. And right now we have about 70 open enrolled kindergarten students.
No, we based it on total capacity.
Correct.
Not, so the number, we kind of talked about that, the number was based upon our estimated capacity. So let's say we're at 415 now. If we go to, hopefully, 600 by, by June or July, and average in a standard deviation of those who aren't gonna show up, that sort of thing, what does that do to our OE then? Because we don't wanna overcrowd kindergarten for crying.
Well, we have space.
We have space.
We have space.
But I mean, that includes first grade, second grade, all that kind of stuff, so we
Mhm.
set capacity limits for each grade.
It's by
Because we don't
school.
want to overcrowd.
Right, so the open enrolled limits that you have are by grade level. And so we do have the space, so we would, again, like we do this spring, we will manage where open enrolled students for next year are indicating so that we're not intentionally overcrowding.
So we may accept, there's a timeline that we'll accept parents in the open enrollment, but we won't place students until later, so that we know exactly where is that capacity across our district.
Okay, so we set a capacity plan and limit based
Mhm.
upon how many we could fit in, based upon size of buildings and number of classrooms. And we estimated open enrollment because we also estimated capacity. What happens if our organic capacity exceeds what we anticipated on any one of these areas? Are we then just going to put more kids in the classrooms over our capacity limits that we talked about? I mean, how is that gonna work?
We would not do
So
that.
if-
We would hire additional staffing to support that and have the moving to classrooms that are not being used right now. Just so that you know, before we go down this route, we've done some things differently this year compared to last year, which I believe has driven up our numbers a little bit. We had a meeting with all of our elementary schools, so the parents had an opportunity to come in and enroll. And in order to be invited to that, they had to enroll. So we tried to give some incentive to have people enroll, where we did not do that last year. So I'm not anticipating that this is a 200 student increase over last year by any means. Also, the other thing that, you know, we need to get up to about 635 students just to be with what we've had in the past, not including this year. You know, our average kindergarten has been about 635. So we're at 415 with residents, we're somewhere around 500 kids. I would anticipate we're gonna end up somewhere really close to that. So.
And I think you're describing the challenge that we always know we're going to have, is because we did a really thorough analysis to try to set some guidelines and have some numbers. But we do have the risk that if suddenly we have a whole lot more resident kindergartners than we thought we were gonna have, and we had opened the doors, we do have a risk. But the probability of that leading to a capacity problem,
Well, the
I thought
other
we
thing
built
that's
that in.
talked about
Possible.
too.
I thought that was
Sorry.
built into this.
Yeah.
already.
Yeah,
It is.
that's what I'm
I
trying to
mean,
say.
it would have to be an extreme
Yeah.
increase.
Well, it's really only 25 additional students or one classroom in essence, additional open enrolled students than we've had in the past. And we have capacity for that.
The whole purpose was to set capacity, so we had something to work with and not really go with a set number. Because we don't want, even if we do, I mean, especially with the situation in Burnsville, if we do end up over, we don't want to overcrowd the classrooms.
Right,
You know,
oh,
we don't-
absolutely.
So that's why you set a capacity and then you work towards that capacity, and then you see how many you still have on a wait list or something like that. And we also have to consider in-district transfer and everything like that, but I just wanna, the goal was to manage by capacity, not by whoever comes up, and let's just meet a predetermined number.
Well, and that's why our promise of open enrollment is something for the board to discuss every single year. So I mean, if this is truly an extraordinary year, I mean, we're not going to we have the capacity for all of those, but I don't think we'll meet all of those. But again, that's part of the work when we come back next summer and fall, is to say, where did enrollment land, based on October 1, to start, putting the information out there for you as a board, looking at our capacity, because we're not adding any more additions.
Right.
We have our post-construction capacity. We'll be able to see where we're at every grade level. As a board, you can set those open enrollment levels every single year, as what you've been doing for the last couple of years, so.
It's kind of similar in which we have an odd grade right now. I think one of our grades is really higher than any, and it just happens sometimes. And so you may have a fourth grade that's less, and kind of like we do right now with kindergarten less, and so we actually have open classrooms because our kindergarten is lower than it is. And maybe we'll have one additional classroom in next year's kindergarten, and really they kind of offset each other. Because we are down about a whole classroom this year in kindergarten for the current year.
So those numbers coming in are really good. I think at this point, I think that was one of the questions that we've had is this year, while we're growing, we didn't reach, what we had anticipated. Is this just a year that we're down? Is this a trend? So it's really great to see that many kindergarten resident students.
But for clarity, Julie, didn't you say, and maybe I didn't hear it correctly, that 415 is higher, where it would have been, it was at 258 before, and that's because we asked them to come to the meeting, they had to register.
Right.
And so what you're saying is
We're
that.
hoping that we incentivize them.
Right, so that number is just really, it's higher for.
Because they enrolled earlier.
Really, could be temporary.
Well, and because what happened, if you recall, last year was the first year we did the online registration. So when we did the online registration, elementary principals didn't hold one of the, when did they traditionally hold that?
The same one.
They didn't hold that because the event that they used to hold was a registration night. So they always would hold that in January, is that right? So when we did the online enrollment, we didn't hold that event, and we learned and wondered from it exactly what Julie said. Do we want to make sure that we're doing something to get people talking about kindergarten earlier, even with the change in what we did with the online?
So we're hoping that was the reason that we had more people enroll their children and coming to our open enrollment open house night for our working students. Any other questions about enrollment? Okay, so we'll continue, so we're anticipating an
Julie,
increase.
I think Mary had a question about number of new students.
For January?
No,
For
no,
this year.
in general this year so far, do we have a number in general for not for every class, but elementary, middle school, and high school? So I know that you said a net change of 50, and we had a very large senior class leaving. I'm just wondering, what did we actually get as far as new students in elementary, middle, and high school? Just, do we have that number? I did ask that.
I do have that number, actually. Are you talking where we're at today?
Well, that's a good.
Well, I can tell, I mean, I have it by month, so I can tell you.
Yeah,
month to month.
as of now.
So we're actually, from last year in elementary, to where we are today, we have 5 additional students. At the middle level, okay, let me look at something else here.
Well, I mean, to date, if we looked at, how many have we actually added new to elementary?
You're talking a net number, or you just wanna know how many new people are in the district, or?
Well, a net number by elementary, middle, and high school, cause, we talked about it ballooning in certain areas, all that kind of stuff, so I just was wondering.
We actually went down overall for a district 17 students in January.
Compared to last year.
No,
Or-
compared from January to February.
Okay,
From January 1 through February 1st, we lost 17 students as a district.
what are we actually at?
To 8802, 8,802 kids.
I'm not sure if I'm answering this. So how many new kids did we actually get this year that weren't in the district before in middle school, for instance? Do we know that, or can you tell? Cause that was my question.
No, let me get that for you so I can make sure I'm giving you the exact correct answers, but overall, we had, starting the school year, about 100 new kids, district-wide.
District-wide,
Yep.
100.
Right. Well, maybe a little over 100 because we're losing 75 students. We anticipated that, and that's where we got to the 50 number. It's really hard because we start the school year and kids leave, and so.
I get it, it
Yeah.
fluctuates.
Yeah.
And it's gonna fluctuate even more in January going forward, cause people move during those, break times and stuff like that. I was just wondering if you knew approximately what it was, so.
Yep. That's about where it was in district-wide, but I can give you by school or by, elementary, middle level,
Okay.
high school. One of the areas that we're really working hard on is special education revenue. They're changing that again. And so we're gonna be working with the Department of Education to make sure that we, position the district to get the greatest amount of revenue that we can for next year. And it may mean how we code or how we allocate funds to the federal funds versus to, state funds, so that we can access and try and, maximize the revenue in that area. It's based on this current year's expenses. And so moving forward, everything that we get will be based on this year, so we wanna make sure that those numbers are exactly where they need to be to maximize that revenue in the future. And then, as Jeff was alluded to, we anticipate about $400,000, or not quite 400, $380,000 in additional achievement and integration revenue. So, based on those assumptions, we're looking right around 3.2 million in additional, revenue. But that number most likely is going to change simply because as we pinpoint some of those things and focus in on some of those areas a little bit better, especially that special ed, we will be looking at a little bit more accurate number in the future to try and really see if we can maximize that and receive a little bit more revenue there. Here's been our expenditure trend, and you can see it closely follows our revenue trend, going up and where we're spending our funds. That purple line at the bottom is salaries, the orange line in the middle is benefits. And so you can see that they're both increasing. The green is purchase services, and that has a tendency to, has been growing as well, and mainly because of software costs for the district. So as we change a little bit from having books and those kinds of things to going to software, that's considered a purchase services, where books are considered a capital item, so it kind of switches a little bit to how some of those funds are spent. And so you can see the other ones kind of are capital items, and supplies and materials is the red color.
Can I ask what the category 800 other expenditures over the years, that looks like it's
That's
increased?
custodial, supplies and materials budget. So that's what the
It's the
800
very
is.
skinny line on top.
Yeah, it's a little tiny one. So it's all of our custodial supplies and repairs and those kinds of things.
And Julie, obviously, we've got debt fund up there, and obviously, when we get done with the building, that should be filling up with the additional tax revenue. Is there a reason why that doesn't show up on there?
And
or-
this is general fund.
Okay,
And you actually can have a debt service in the general fund if you borrow money, so aid anticipation certificates.
okay,
So the debt service fund that you're talking about is Fund 7, that is not part of the general fund.
okay.
So we don't have aid anticipation certificates or anything that we're borrowing money for right now, and so you're not seeing that as part of the general fund. And when you talk about buildings, I would show you a whole different graph for Fund 7.
Okay.
And we're only really talking right now about the general fund. So this is some assumptions, and I don't necessarily have all of the costs out here. I'm making some assumptions and cost and giving you an estimate, but we haven't, some of these things aren't solidified yet either. So we're just wondering if the board is, if we're heading in the right direction, you want us to head in a different direction. We're still costing our wages and benefits based on that 4-year average. However, the piece of it is number 2, we're anticipating an increase in our health insurance costs. We have had a high utilization of our health insurance, so that's claims. And so we've had, this last year that we're in right now, a very high utilization. So when our claims go over our premium and we're self-insured, we need to make sure that we're right-sizing our premium to cover our anticipated claims in the future. So there's quite a bit of data that our insurance committee has been looking at, but this is what we're anticipating somewhere around there. We haven't done the work that we need to do yet with the insurance committee to see if there's some ways that we can reduce that cost. And so we're working on that right now, yes.
The para contract, is that included as part of the increase here too?
That's included as part of that. I mean, not all of our pairs opted to participate. In our in the health insurance that was offered them. So can be good and bad. The bad part about that is you don't have premiums of the other people who enroll usually need health insurance. And so they're usually utilizing it. So it's called an adverse selection, because now you have more people utilizing your health insurance without premiums to cover those costs.
But that's part of this increase.
That's
too,
part of it,
which.
potentially.
Yeah, okay, which we won't necessarily see every year the same.
We have, we've talked about, is this a one-time blip, or is this a continued cost? And our costs have increased significantly.
Just with the static group, you're saying, just even with the group that we had, I mean.
Right,
without-
just with our
yeah.
current group, and
Yeah.
so we anticipate if our claims continue to go, and with just the general cost of health insurance. Health insurance is going up, prescription drugs are getting more and more expensive all the time. And people need, and there's opportunity for people to have expensive drugs. There's some drugs that we offer that are $10,000 a month. And if you have 25 people utilizing our health insurance and spending $60,000 to $100,000, $120,000 a year, it just gets to be very expensive for any insurance. Anyone who offers insurance to cover those costs. So we're looking at that. We'll be working with our insurance committee to see if there's ways that we can help bring down that increase and offset that. But we haven't done that work yet, but we'll be doing some of that in our next several meetings with the insurance committee.
And we're self-funded in all of our plans for different groups, right? Or is that?
All of our district offerings for health and dental are self-insured.
Have we ever had administration fees and all that kind of stuff ever
Every 2
audited?
years.
Every 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Every 2 years, we do an RFP for all of our fixed costs and making sure that we are getting offered the cheapest or the best that we can for our fixed costs.
What I mean by audit them is when the claims are adjudicated, insurance companies sometimes don't always abide by the percentage of the fees that you're charging for administration, for transactional, stuff like that, and
We
so
can
there's-
see all of that in all of our data.
You can see all that, so you know that it's right on
Yeah.
target.
Yeah, we can see all of that data.
Okay.
Yep. So we do track that, and we do measure those costs against what we anticipate to make sure that they're on target as well. We anticipate 2 buses for transportation, just simply because of boundary changes, and we will have anticipated some increase in enrollment as well. It's the first year we are renegotiating our transportation contract. One of the things that our transportation company has been telling us, it's difficult to find drivers. Just for your information, our district spends one of the least amounts of money for our transportation contracts in our surrounding area. Even the 7-county metro, we have an excellent contract with them. They've been a great partner with us, but it's gotten to the point where they just can't find drivers. And they need to do something. It's similar to our paras and our custodians, and what do we do to help offset that? So that is a cost that we'll be working with them to see what that looks like and what kind of increase that we need to have so that we can attract drivers to help drive our children to school every day. We're still working through determining the FTE needs for our student to staff ratios, and we'll be working with that in the HR department and making sure that we're offering and what we're, for students and staff and for our electives and all those types of things are on target. We're also reviewing our special ed staffing needs and what we anticipate. Our special ed enrollment is growing in our district. So that percentage is growing, and so the need for that staffing is growing as well. Additional custodial staffing for opening new building spaces. If you recall, the board authorized 6 staff this year. We're still working on hiring those, and that's part of our savings for this year that we didn't spend in expenditures. But we'll probably need at least 3 more when we open Hamilton Ridge Elementary School, and then the high school as well. Additional expenditures for utilities and other fixed costs for the new building spaces, and we've had that, and we know what those expenses, we anticipate what they will be, based on what our costs are for other buildings of similar size. And then we are seeing an increase, of course, because of additional space and property liability, and we are seeing a large increase in our workers' comp insurance. And that increase, I know, will at least be $100,000 of an increased cost of workers' comp. So I know that is coming. I'm still waiting to hear what our property liability overall increase will be. And then we have some additional custodial budget for the new building spaces as well. So although I'm estimating an increase in expenditures of a little over $5 million, it may not be that high once we actually get all of that vetted out and to see where we're at with those expenses. So as we've seen this before, and we've talked about this before, and although this looks like we're going off a cliff, we don't get to that cliff because the board will make decisions to help us maintain a good, healthy fund balance and help us move forward so that we are moving in the right direction for the fiscal health of the district. So I would think most districts, their fund balance looks similar to that if they look out 5 years, if they don't make changes to their revenues and expenditures similar to what we do. So again, we're kind of back to this outcome of reviewing the revenue and expenditure assumptions and then providing us any direction or any other things that you would like us to review or bring back for your information. We'd be happy to do that.
Are you looking for feedback now?
If you have feedback, I'd be happy to take it, or things you'd like us to review. One of the things that we had talked about is that one board member said it's a $1.7 million differential revenue to expenditures. Is that what we need to reduce? And I think when we look back at what the board approved this year for a final budget for overspent, that was higher. Our expenditures were more than our revenues, so we need to kind of make up a little bit of ground there as well.
So,
Sorry.
so
Go
our,
ahead.
our recommendation at this point, and again, I think that Julie did a nice job saying, there's some unknowns here, but we have to work on assumptions. So as we look at the parameters that you set, in terms of fund balance, in terms of restoring class size, given the parameters that you gave us with the open enrollment, we're planning on working toward, budget adjustments, that equal about a $3 million, adjustment that we'll bring forward to you. We've got a timeline and process where, what we're hoping for is, that we could come to you in March, with some draft, ideas. We've talked about a tiered system of bringing some options to you to take a look at and get a chance to talk about. Then we'd go back and do more work, come back to you in April with tighter recommendations, and then seek board approval in May. And then in the meantime, what we'll do is we'll work with our staff. We'll meet with principals tomorrow, so we'll see if Julie and I will be doing a little bit of a road show with all the staff, just to give them the context. I'll be sending out a communication to staff tomorrow morning so that they're aware of this conversation, of our recommendation moving forward. We'll get input from them. We'll get input and prioritization from our administrative team. So anything that we bring to you would have had those voices in on it as well. We'll also take a look at some of the criteria. We start every meeting with that strategic plan because that is what is most sacred, what you've approved and said is most sacred to our district. So been working really hard. Jim's team and Jeff's team have been working really hard on really reviewing some staffing efficiencies and program efficiencies as we look at that parameter around restoring class size ratios. So just making sure that we're digging deeper than we have. Last year we dug very deeply. Jim led us through a process with the elementary schools to look at staffing, and we're doing the same thing with secondary right now.
So when you come forward in March, then, at our next time we talk about it, you'll have some maybe initial ideas, but you can also explain a little more of the process and who was involved and how we got to some of those recommendations.
Yep,
Just so we know.
And one of the things, we'd like your input on is, we know that we'll be getting, input from staff and administrators, and, we wondered if you'd also like us to hold, a community meeting or a public meeting at some point to get input. And I think the timing of that, we'd like to know from you. Do we do that earlier? Do we wait until after some things come forward in March that we gathered from the staff and from admin, and then did that to give us more input? So it'd certainly be open to your ideas and recommendation on that.
Terry, I've said this year after year after year, but as we're going through some of the recommendations and some of the efficiencies, et cetera, to actually pit that against meeting those goals that we talked about in the beginning, and what's actually gonna put those at risk. So if we don't get, let's say, the added paras in and all that kind of stuff, obviously that puts those goals at risk, and we need to know that as we're making our decision.
And I think, thanks for saying that, Mary, because I think that, you know, as we look at, we will, when we ask staff for input, we will have some criteria around that. You know, we have some sacred things that we have to take a look at, including strategic plan, what makes sure that, you know, doesn't move away from some of our district goals. It's hard though, because, you know, we see our goals and our programs all over that strategic plan, but I hear what you're saying.
Are you asking us to, give you input now on like if we would want a community level of input, or as a board, do we wanna talk about if we wanna reconsider that in March after they brought first the initial thoughts from the people who are, you know, frontline staff doing this? I wanna make sure I'm giving you what you need,
Yeah.
we're giving you what you need.
Yeah,
going
I know
forward.
in the next, between now and March 16th, when we come to you again, we will have plenty of work to do to solicit input and to first educate and bring awareness to our
Right.
staff, and our administrators, and then to get input from them. So, yeah, I guess if before March 16th, you'd also like us to do something with the community, we'd need to know that so that we can plan that. If we can take a look at where we are in March, plan something,
Sounds like it'd be
My
premature.
initial thought is, I'm all about hearing from the community, so that's not a problem. But to bring, just community, what do you think,
Mhm.
is too nebulous. And, I don't think we wanna go there.
Yeah.
I think we need to have some idea of what we're looking at, like, you know, I mean, every organization at some point can, you know, trim it back a little bit, make some efficiencies that still do not hurt the quality of what they're offering as their program. So if that's the direction you're going in, that's great. If you start talking about, we're gonna have to cut this or that, or, you know, the bad word cut, that's where we're gonna get some public,
Yep. Yeah.
input right way, and it may not be where we even need to go. So I'd like to hear from the public, I think, but I think we need to give them some parameters of what you're kind of looking at doing.
So you'll know that whatever we come forward with on March 16th, you'll know that that will be representative of input from our staff and input from, obviously, our administrative team as well.
And I just wanna point out that even though Dr. Staloch said it's $3 million, and it seems like a really big number, and it is, but it's less than 3% of our budget. You know, when we have $105 million of expenses, $3 million is less than 3% of that total budget. So, I mean, there's.
The other thing I wanna add to what Julie said, I think that as we do our exploration, she said that $5 million expenditure, it may not be that much. I would rather have us do the work right now of looking at that $3 million number. And if we come back to you and say, you know what, these things have come in differently than our assumptions, our numbers, our enrollment numbers are coming in differently, then again, that layered approach, you know, you'll have a lot more flexibility with that number, and we'll be able to provide more information.
I just wanted to, I know the 3 million, I know without having to look at it here, I'm assuming, because this is one of the outcomes, is to keep it between 8 and 12. But between 8 and 12, I mean, 8 is one thing, 12 is another thing, and there's quite a bit of dollars in between there. And we've generally stayed above 10. I just want us to make sure that we can have the flexibility in there that, hey, we might say this might be, we're thinking this is a one-year thing, maybe we wanna dip into the fund balance a little bit more than what we have. I mean, so I'm assuming that, like, we'll see some of these things with item numbers as far as like quantity, you know what I mean? If there's play in there, is what I'm saying, basically.
Right. Look, that's why it's this layered approach of you could choose something less, or you could choose something more than what you're anticipating. Really, it depends on what enrollment comes in, like Dr. Staloch said, or could, you know, we make some adjustments to different things, or we think we're gonna get more special ed revenue than we anticipated. All of those things will impact what that number could potentially be, or it could be something the board says, maybe we need to do that anyway, and these are things that we think we could. It's really gonna depend on where what we can bring forward to you and what you can feel confident in looking at.
So for me to give an educated answer for myself, I would like to see you go back to the staff, get their input, administrators get their input, and then bring that back to the board, so we have something concrete to really look at and talk about.
That sounds great.
That's intent.
That's my opinion,
I agree.
I'm not sure where the rest of the board is at.
Yep, I definitely wanna hear from staff in
Yep.
particular because they're the front lines.
Yep.
So,
So just a few key messages that I want to be sure we're all leaving with. We are still a growing district, and as we heard tonight, we've got some comparably healthy kindergarten numbers, and we'll see what happens with that. We have fewer students, if you notice that, I think it was the 11th slide, it was page 53. We have fewer students opting out of prior Lake Savage area schools, and that's been the trend over the years. So I think that's an important key message, that we're maintaining, some of those resident students. We're grateful for the new space that we have, and we need the new space. So we're grateful for that. Our district is financially stable, and we need to make some adjustments to make sure that we continue on the course of offering an excellent education and maintaining the financial stability that we've been known for. We are going to be looking at adjustments that we'll need for the budget, and right now we'll be working on about $3 million of that. We'll go through a process in the next month, then 5 weeks, where we gather input, work with our administrators to prioritize some of that. We'll come back in March with some draft ideas to discuss. We'll get continued direction from you. We'll come back in April with additional adjustments that we've made based on input from you, input from the community, if that's the direction that you give us. And then our hope would be if the board could approve in May. That'd be great. That gives Julie, her team, all of us time then to finalize that budget by June. Is there anything else that the board would be looking for at this point, other than what we just kind of reviewed?
I think that's a good summary.
Okay.
This is something that the board hasn't had to do in 10 years, so.
Say it's my first year on the board.
no, yeah.
10 years it's been since the board's had to make any.
It's not fun.
So the messaging of this will be real important, and I'll start that tomorrow with an email communication to our staff, and that's why I think as Julie and I probably will be doing presentations to staff. I think it's important to show that we're in a healthy position, and we want to be sure that we keep it that way. So we want to tighten some things and make sure that we make those adjustments.
The good part of it is it makes us look at ourselves to see how we're spending our money and if we're being efficient. So there's a positive.
There is a
If there is a
positive,
positive, that
yeah.
is one for us, so. Okay, so this board doesn't like to talk about policy.
Wow.
It's almost 7 o'clock. You all should have received the MSBA's report, either electronically or in your mailbox. So if you hopefully get a chance to review that. The first policy that we were going to talk about is 208, development, adoption, implementation of policy. I would like to still talk about that policy, but I think the rest of them, I think we're gonna just have to go down the list as we can. We're not gonna continue all the policies tonight, we can't. We've got 2 other people coming, and out of respect for their time, I would like to end the work session, but just wondering if we can quickly review a little bit of the development of policy, development, adoption, and implementation of policy, since it's a policy about policies. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments about that policy? It's 208.
I can speak
Go
to
ahead,
it a little
Stacy.
bit. Just with some of the board training that we had last year, Michael and I on policy, I think it was session 4 on policy and board's role. This was, the change you see there in A is a kind of best practice for policies. And so it's something where we thought it would give more public input options as far as on policies and voting. And then we'd be able to work in tandem, so we go, which I think we used to do this when I was first on the board too, is first and second reads as we progress through policies. So it somewhat will elongate how long we're looking at policies, but it allows for first and second reads, and it allows for more public input at those readings, so this is what's recommended by MSBA, and so that's essentially the change. You see.
And I don't know if it's clear on here, but we could be working on, we could have different policies in different parts of the rotation, so we're not taking one policy all the way through and then starting another policy. One of the policies might be in the second or the third phase, and a new one coming in, so we're kind of doing both. So we shouldn't really be losing much time.
We wouldn't lose time, we just have to start a little bit earlier than, I mean, sort of.
It would give more opportunity to have, for more
And that-
discussion and for the community, if they have concerns about policy, to,
Have opportunity to bring it up, yeah.
or to, contact us.
Right.
If I may add, I like that idea because we've had too many where we talk about it and then vote on it, and it doesn't give anybody time to look at it. Now, some of these policies people won't.
Right. Most
But
certainly.
at
Most won't,
least we're
yeah.
being consistent,
Yeah.
and we're allowing the time, and not the immediate turnaround, and I'd rather focus on quality instead of speed.
So,
That's really the only thing on this policy, I believe.
So if everyone's good with that, we move that forward.
We'll move that from the work session to the regular meeting for discussion.
Okay.
So we're not gonna follow through with this?
I was just gonna say, I want that.
No, we would.
I want that to know.
No, we know, look at what it
No, we
says.
will.
It says
Yeah.
work session, regular meeting, work session, regular meeting.
Yeah, right, but
This
we
will
never-
move to the next, to the regular meeting.
To the next regular meeting, not this
Oh,
one tonight.
no, won't be the one
tonight.
tonight.
That's
Mark,
why,
I'm sorry.
that's why I was looking at Terry, we're looking at each other going,
No.
oh, Mark, can we
No,
just
the
go
March
over
meeting,
policy?
sorry, the March meeting.
No,
If you look,
March.
if you look on the agenda, it's not on there.
Well,
Okay, well, we got one done, yay. Okay, did you have anything else to comment on, Terry?
No?
I don't really have anything informational that can't wait till another time. Is there anyone in the audience that wanted to comment on anything that we discussed tonight? At the work session? Okay, then we will adjourn for 5 minutes and we'll start the board meeting.